Welcome to Legal Video Resource. I'm Jason Wheathalter. Today we're talking about the 3 things you need to know to become a deposition videographer. So how does one become a deposition videographer? Well, it's really 3 things you have to understand. First, understand procedure. Second, understand technology. And third, understand how to put those 2 things together. It seems simple enough, but really it's a lot easier said than done. Procedure, first of all. Procedure is the rules that govern what it is that we do as deposition videographers. You can find these in the federal rules of civil procedure. There are also state rules that govern the procedural aspects of deposition video. What actually happens during the deposition video in terms of the questions that are asked from the attorneys of the witness, those aren't covered necessarily by the rules, just the procedural aspects are. So if you're in a federal case, in a federal jurisdiction, then you're going to be governed by the federal rules of civil procedure. If you're in a state case, in a state jurisdiction, there are going to be state rules of civil procedure, which function very similar and a lot of times are modeled after the federal rules. But be aware there could be some differences. And in many cases, there are slight differences. The states are typically a little bit faster to change or update their rules of civil procedure, whereas the federal rules, they might take more time to kind of update along the way, or they might not always update all the rules. They might update one rule or pieces of a rule. So a lot of times state rules will have slight clarifications or slight changes to them. And those slight changes might be something that's idiosyncratic to that state, or it could just be something that maybe that state legislature believes or that state judiciary believes could be a little bit clearer, where the federal rules are not quite so clear. But in any case, you'll almost never deal with a situation in which both federal and state rules of civil procedure apply in the same case. There are instances it gets really complex when those kind of things can happen. And if you have a question about that, make sure to always ask the attorney that's hiring you, because they're the ones that actually know the law. But for the most part, you can rely on the federal rules, look at the state rules. They're going to be fairly similar. Again, state rules are most times modeled after the federal rules. The second aspect of procedure are industry standards. And industry standards are, what video does as an industry. So an industry standard, an example of that might be standard definition versus high definition video. Standard definition video was for broadcast, so it's an industry standard specification. It really has nothing to do with legal. It's a video standard. High definition is kind of the same way. It's not a legal standard, it's a video standard. And so industry standards are kind of the backbone of what you need to know as a videographer in terms of how to use the technology and the equipment that you're using to make it match the procedure. And industry standards are a little bit different from the actual technology you're going to be using, because industry standards help you to know how that technology is supposed to be used, not just that you can do that thing, but this is the industry standard, and the piece of technology that you're using, whatever you're doing with that piece of technology, you should match or meet that industry standard. Best practices are kind of the legal video specific procedural aspects of industry standards and federal rules of civil procedure. One example of this is in the federal rules of civil procedure, they talk about the unit of recording medium. Well, what exactly is a unit of recording medium? Back when these rules were promulgated and that language was put in there, tape was still a big thing, and DVDs were still a big thing. So what does unit of recording medium mean today when you can record everything onto an SD card or onto a hard drive? So it's those kind of things that then you're layering together the federal rules and the industry standards to come up with a best practice. There are lots of examples of this, but these are the kinds of things that you need to know in order to become a deposition videographer. The second thing that you need to know about is technology. And you need to know about technology before you become a deposition videographer, because as a deposition videographer, it's kind of in the name. You need to know video. So what does that encompass? Well, it doesn't just encompass video, it encompasses audio and video, and it encompasses post-production of that audio and video. It's a lot to learn. It really is, because you can learn so much, and you can also learn so much about so much. You can have a great breadth of knowledge and also a depth of understanding of these technologies. And as a videographer, you really need to be very proficient at all three of these things: audio, video, and post-production. You owe it to yourself to know these things, because you're holding yourself out as a professional in the legal video space or in the litigation space. You're holding yourself out as a professional when it comes to video. And you owe it to your clients, because you want to offer them the best services that you can. And the only way you can do that is if you know the most that you can about audio, video, post-production technology. So you need to know about, mic versus line level. You need to know about decibel level. You need to know about sound pressure volumes. You need to know about how to control sound, how to manage sound, what things are going to create sound in an environment that you can kind of strategically move around. You need to know about different mic pickup patterns and which mic is going to be the best option for that particular shoot, whether it's a deposition or maybe you're doing evidentiary video. You need to know about video technologies. You need to know about sensors and lenses and zoom ratios and what it means to be a 22x optical zoom versus a 35 to 350 millimeter equivalent zoom. You need to know the differences between gain and ISO. You need to know how to focus, how to use aperture, how to white balance. You need to know all these things, and you need to know all the things that there are to know about formats. We talked about industry standards and standard definition versus high definition. Well, now you've got 4K. You know about frame rates, 30 frames per second, 24 frames per second. What about off-speed shooting, like 120 frames per second? See, there's tons of information that you need to know about technology, but you might not need to know all of it right away, and you might not need to know all of it in as much detail as somebody else does. That's part of being in the profession, is continuing to learn about technology, both changes in technology and learning more about the technology that you already know. And then once you know about how to do all this audio video capture technology, you also need to know about how to post-produce it, how to encode it, how to deliver it to a client. So you need to know what's wrong with delivering the video straight out of my camera. There are lots of things wrong with it. One is your client isn't an expert in video, you are. So you might have tools, resources, knowledge, and understanding about how to play back that video that your client just isn't going to have. They want to be able to stick it into their computer or into a projector or some other system and it just work. That's what they want. And that's your job in the post-production process, is to make it just work. And you need to know the differences between that capture format that you used with all the audio video technology you used before, and you need to know how to create that deliverable for them to use. And that's post-production technology. So you need to know how to, bring the files or bring the data from the tapes or whatever you captured to into your computer. You need to know how to archive that securely, so that way you have a copy of it as a backup. You need to know how to deliver it to your client. You need to know about the different ways that you can deliver it. You need to know about how you can synchronize the transcript, the court reporter's transcript, to your video. You need to know how to use that and deliver it to a client and show that client how to use that technology. And then, like I said, the third thing is, and we kind of touched on a little bit, you need to know how these things overlap or interact, both the standards or the procedure and the technology. For example, one of the things that you really want to understand is how to act at a deposition, what to say at a deposition, where to stand, how to set up, what to record, those are all really important questions to answer. So as you're kind of thinking about how do I become a deposition videographer, what do I need to learn, remember that in particular, it's procedure and technology, those two things, but then how those two things overlap and interact is almost more important, because a lot of people, when they join or become a legal videographer or a deposition videographer, they typically come from one of two camps. Typically, you come from the video production side, so you know a lot about technology, but you know almost nothing about procedure. Other people come from the paralegal or court reporter side, where they might know a lot about their technology, but a lot about procedure, but almost nothing about video production technology. Some people do come from the perspective of not knowing anything about either. They just heard about it from a friend and they said, oh, deposition video sounds interesting. And it is, it's really interesting. And if you're coming from that perspective, you got to learn both procedure and technology and how those two things overlap and interact. So people that understand the procedural aspects, they'll know how to act at a depo. They'll typically know what to say at a depo. They'll typically know where to stand at a deposition. But what they might not know about is how to set up the technology or what and when to record or how to record. So that's where these two things begin to overlap and interact, is when you really move the two pieces together and you say, okay, I know that this rule says at the beginning of every unit of the recording medium, I need to say these things. That's a federal rule of civil procedure. That's the procedural aspect. But then on the technological aspect, on the technology aspect, what is a unit of recording medium? So as a videographer, you know what a unit of recording medium is. And on the procedural aspects, you know that, hey, whenever I start a new recording medium, I have to say these things. And so that's how these things overlap and interact. So that's how you become a deposition videographer. You know the procedure, you know the technology, and you understand how those two things overlap and interact. There's lots of other aspects to being a deposition videographer, running a business, doing all those things. But when you talk about the practice and the profession of being a deposition videographer, it's those three things: procedure, technology, how they interact. Thank you so much for joining us today on learning how to become a deposition videographer. If you found this video helpful, I encourage you to click subscribe down below, because as we produce more content and deliver it, you'll be the first to know about it. Also, if you have any questions or comments, something that you liked about the show or something you want to learn more about, leave us a comment down below. We'll try to respond to some of those and also use that information to help shape further content in the future. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time on Legal Video Resource.